Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Europe starts looking within for its own defense. Welcome to the Tuesday edition as NATO announces $50 billion in new defense deals, with more contracts going to European manufacturers than we saw a year ago. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. And Kailey, this is just day one of the summit. They're just rolling into dinner right now.
Yep, dinner with the allies, a lot of pomp and circumstance involved in this. That dinner, of course, follows the bilateral meeting between President Trump and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan earlier today. But the big day really is going to be tomorrow. That's where the bulk of the talks within the summit will be underway, including another bilateral meeting that is planned between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. As, of course, part of the aim of Europe here is not just to satisfy the president on defense spending, but also to make sure that it shores up U.S. support for the Ukrainian cause.
And a big ask for more Patriot interceptor missiles. We're going to talk to Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern in just a moment. She's traveling with the president and will join us live from Ankara with, as I mentioned, tens of billions of dollars in deals already unveiled, Kailey, and one of them sees Saab replacing Boeing with a critical system that's worth a good $5 billion. NATO allies are starting to get the message from Washington.
Of course, one of the messages NATO allies have been receiving from Washington as well, or specifically from President Trump, is that Trump is disappointed with them for not getting more involved in the Strait of Hormuz. And that's something else we have to talk about today, as we saw a laden tanker of LNG from Qatar being struck near the Strait, a Saudi vessel as well, which raises questions once again on the security of passage for vessels that are trying to get energy exports out of this region.
That's for sure. It's moving oil prices today, Kailey, on a day where we're seeing a big unwind in many cases in tech stocks following that Samsung earnings report. It's look out below for a lot of these memory names all of a sudden.
Indeed it is. So let's get a check on them and everything else moving in the markets today as we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey and Joe. Indeed, you mentioned crude oil looking at an almost 3% jump right now for West Texas Intermediate crude. Key takeaway back above 70 barrels, 70.38, up by 2.7%. Barrel of Brent crude 74.06 right now, up 2.9%. You mentioned the selling in semiconductor names. We begin with the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, down now by 4.4%. All of this meaning a major sell-off in tech names today. We do have NASDAQ down 0.6%. The NASDAQ 100 Index down 1.3%. And the S&P 500 Index lower by 0.3, as is the Dow, lower by 0.3%. Interestingly, though, on a day in which techs are declining, we're looking at gains for the Bloomberg Mag 7 Index. It is up now by 0.4%. 10-year at 4.52%, with a 2-year 4.14%. Gold is down $20 the ounce. Spot gold down 0.5%, 41.44 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude again up 2.7%, 70.38 a barrel. We continue to monitor developments in Midtown Manhattan. We're keeping an eye on a collapse warning for a Midtown office building in the midst of a conversion to residential. You heard city officials speaking about it moments ago on Bloomberg. It is the old Pfizer building that we're talking about on 42nd Street in Midtown. Construction crews earlier today were pulled from that 37-story Manhattan building after bricks were reported falling from the 21st floor. That prompted building evacuations and street closures right along 42nd Street, close to Grand Central, one of the city's busiest corridors. Again, recapping here, S&P 500 Index down 0.3% right now. We've got the SOX lower by 4.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet checking on the markets from New York. Thank you so much. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu in Washington, but it's Ankara that we have our eyes on at the moment as the NATO summit is underway in Turkey. And right now, leaders of NATO countries are walking in to a dinner as the proceedings get going here. A lot of pomp and circumstance involved in the arrivals themselves. Of course, the host country of NATO, Turkey, and its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, are part of the reason why President Trump is in attendance at this NATO summit. He has suggested it's a favor to Erdogan, essentially, that he decided to join with everyone else over the course of these few days. And we did see a bilateral meeting happening between him and Erdogan earlier today, just after the president was wheels down in Turkey, where he was asked about that relationship in particular.
Mr. President, are you going to sell F-35s to Turkey, and what about the legal restrictions?
It's a decision we're going to make. We have a very good relationship. I would think that many people, I can tell you, many people, including the people sitting right here, thinks, why wouldn't we do that? We have a better relationship with Turkey, and Turkey's been in many ways much more loyal than other countries that we think would be loyal. So something certainly we would consider. It's a great plane. It's the best, currently the best plane by far. And it's certainly something we will consider.
A little difficult to hear the president there, who was some distance away from reporters. We need to get a better boom mic, I think, in Turkey. He did say Turkey has in many ways been much more loyal than other countries that we would think would be loyal. So we got some things we would consider. And it sounds a lot like he is moving closer to that line, to reinstating Turkey in the F-35 program, something that might not be considered good news in Tel Aviv. Let's get to Ankara right now. Bloomberg correspondent Annmarie Hordern, our chief political correspondent, is traveling with the president in Ankara and joins us live right now as the sun is setting behind her. This will be an important dinner, I suppose, Annmarie, but so many deals have already been hammered out. $50 billion and more than we've seen in the past going to European defense contractors. What can you tell us?
Well, Europe's going to have to really go to local contractors and manufacturers when it comes to starting to really, truly reindustrialize their defense industrial base. You heard Mark Rutte for weeks now talking about how really this summit is about the transatlantic alliance reindustrializing. So that means they're going to have to rely on some systems they've always relied on from the United States, but there's going to be more deals. And we saw that with the rollout of the $50 billion deal so far. We know that instead of Boeing, they're going to Saab for some sort of aircrafts. So there are going to be other manufacturers they bring into the fold, because remember, this meeting is about trying to meet the target they set last year, and that was a 5% of GDP defense target, 3.5% going to all of the hardware, ammunition, the tools you're going to need to build that industrial base, and then 1.5% the support, the bridges, the roads, the ports, when it comes about providing the infrastructure for a defense industrial base. So those are the deals so far. And then, of course, the big one we're all waiting for is any sort of concrete details, how the President of the United States sees Turkey really coming back to the F-35 program, given the fact that there is a law in Congress that bars them from it because they, of course, bought S-400s from Russia.
Well, and on the subject of Russia, Annmarie, I would imagine that that is going to be a dinner topic of conversation this evening, and clearly a topic of conversation between Vladimir Zelensky and President Trump in their bilateral meeting tomorrow. What, if anything, in terms of deliverables for Ukraine is expected out of this summit?
Well, Ukraine is really once again trying to implore the alliance and the United States to send more Patriot air defense missiles. And we heard from Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, saying that there's not a ton of interceptors that could just be easily moved around when it comes to the alliance. This is really important for Zelensky, especially given the past few days we saw a wave of attacks on Kyiv, and some of the defenses weren't able to shoot down ballistic missiles. And that is why he is saying the next battle of this war is being fought in the air. And that is why he's imploring the United States for more of the Patriot missiles. Now, for months, there has been talk, and this was brought up as well at the G7 summit in France, there has been talk of maybe giving Ukraine a license to manufacture and build those defense systems in country. And I spoke to the Finnish President Alexander Stubb earlier today, and he said that would definitely be a welcome gesture. And it comes at a time that he says Europe is trying to salvage their relationship with this White House.
All right, Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern, our chief political correspondent, live on the ground in Ankara for this NATO summit. Thank you so much. And as we consider the question of Ukraine and the ongoing war with Russia, we bring in now Melinda Haring, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, who's joining us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Melinda. It's good to see you.
Great to be with you.
As Annmarie was just outlining, clearly Ukraine has been vocal about the need for more Patriot systems. If it gets it, Would Ukraine be able to win this war outright?
Can I say hold that thought for a minute? So I think Annmarie is right that there are a limited number of Patriot interceptors, but the big discussion is two things. So there is a finite number of these things, but if the U.S. were willing to give its licensing permission to Ukraine, that would be a game changer. That would be an absolute game changer. There's something else the U.S. can do as well. So if you go to the factory where these PAC-3s are made, it's in Camden, Arkansas. They're not on a 24-hour schedule. I think that's incredible. We're more than 4.5 years into the war. Come on. President Trump can make a phone call and fix this today.
Wow. So there could be ways of expanding the defense industrial base right now, overnight, with a phone call, to your point. Shy of the hardware, we've seen a remarkable advance, bold moves by Ukraine, striking deeper into Russia, and they've been answered by very heavy ballistic missile attacks on civilian areas in Kyiv. But what has been the change in mindset to be able to see Ukraine reach so deeply into Russia and actually begin a conversation about whether it can win this war? It's a very different place than we were in a year or two ago. How much is that affecting the feeling and hopes on the ground?
Joe, it is a massive change. I was in Kiev in December, and it was one of the grimmest periods. You guys know that I go there a lot.
Yes,
this was my 10th trip there, and I was sleeping in the basement every night in one of the nice hotels, waking up to the smell of tires because you're so far down in the ground. You're in a parking garage sleeping, and I couldn't get to the train station because there were missile strikes. And the mood was so grim, and Ukraine barely made it through the winter. It is hard to describe. Day and night, black and white, it doesn't even do justice to the feeling. But Ukrainians, on that trip, I got to go to Firepoint, and Firepoint is the Ukrainian company that's making the long-range rockets. And they're getting better and better at hitting refineries. So Ukraine has managed to hit all of Russia's major refineries except for one. So Ukraine, its technology is improving, and its drones, its long-range drones are improving as well.
Well, so when we consider that improvement in technology, in morale, is there a sense that Ukraine could end up on the winning side of this conflict, or does it still ultimately need to be a negotiated outcome that's pursued?
So wars always end in negotiations, but right now there is a strategy in place on the Ukrainian side to push as hard as possible with these long-range strikes, and the idea is to compel Vladimir Putin to actually come to the negotiating table. And I think it's working. We see the Russian economy is in trouble, and we see increasing pressure, and we see the Ukrainian side getting closer and closer to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and we see elite splits as well. So is it going to change overnight? No. But the Ukrainians also did something really wise. They've been interrupting supply lines around Crimea and putting huge pressure on logistics, and that's how you win wars.
Interesting. We've talked for years about this now, which is pretty remarkable to think about. In many of our conversations, you've led us to the realization that it's manpower just as much as it is material. We can give all the bombs, tanks, and weapons we can make, but Ukraine needs to have people to wear uniforms and go shoot those weapons. This was becoming harder with time. Where is the recruitment effort now?
So that discussion has actually changed. You and I had this discussion about, oh my God, there's not enough Ukrainian troops to hold the front line. So because Ukraine has invested so much in its drone technology, the kill ratio has really changed. So now one Ukrainian is killed for every 5 Russian. So this is actually, the Russians don't have enough soldiers now. The math has really, really changed. The Russian side is losing 35,000 troops a month. That's an enormous number, and they're not able to replenish their side. And they're pulling in
even through conscripts, even through jails.
Well, so Putin has a political problem. He doesn't want to have a draft. So he's trying to avoid that, and he's been pulling people out of jail. He uses drug addicts. The people that he's putting on the front line are not a great fighting force. These are not West Point graduates, right, Joe?
Yes, it sounds like it.
Well, and as we consider the pressure that the personnel challenges will put on the Kremlin, there's also the question of additional financial pressure. Bloomberg had reported previously about the notion that even the Russian finance ministry was talking about the costs of this war being untenable. And then there's the question of tougher sanctions as well. There was reporting in the Wall Street Journal today, Melinda, that on the sidelines of the NATO summit, a group of lawmakers are going to be meeting with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, to talk about a bill that would intensify Russian sanctions. What would that do ultimately, do you think, if it were to come to fruition?
So I'm really skeptical. This administration does not like sanctions on Russia, and we've seen them back away on sanctions on Russia. So I think it's fabulous. They should absolutely do it. The EU has put, I think, 24 or 25 packages in place, and with sanctions, you have to keep fine-tuning them because the Russians are masters at sanctions evasion.
We should note that French President Emmanuel Macron is just arriving at the NATO dinner and posing for photographs with President Erdogan, and we're told that President Trump's motorcade should be arriving imminently here. If you're with us on YouTube or Bloomberg TV, there's a live view as the dignitaries get together to break bread. And of course, Ukraine will be part of that conversation. So too will Russia. And I'm wondering your thoughts on Vladimir Putin's place in the universe right now. What is his level of security? What is his approval rating in Russia? If you could take such a poll.
So if you could take such a poll is the clause that we need to emphasize. So his numbers are terrible. And there are splits between the presidential administration and the security services. And there's a growing number of people that want him to back away. And then there's a growing number of people that want to increase pressure. But Vladimir Putin is paranoid. He takes high security risks. A bunch of papers have reported all of the different ways that he's trying to stay out of the public. He's not giving a lot of public speeches anymore because he's afraid of the security
risk.
Should he be? Yes, of course he should be afraid of this. The Ukrainians are really clever at these things, and we've seen the Ukrainians pull off, all kinds of. If I were Vladimir Putin, I would be afraid of the Ukrainian security services too. But
how about that?
Joe, it was even people around Putin who work in his entourage can't take an Uber or they can't take the Moscow metro. That's how paranoid he is, and I think he took their phones away from them too.
Wow.
Well, and of course, that's just as he considers the threat posed by Ukraine. Of course, he, in part, went into Ukraine in the first place over 4 years ago because he was concerned that Ukraine might one day become a member of NATO. Now, as we see the NATO alliance gathering in Ankara with a pursuit of 5% of spending of GDP on defense, has this all ultimately backfired with his aims here? Is it a stronger NATO that has emerged out of these last many years?
Absolutely. We have 2 new NATO members, and Ukraine has become Sparta. It's a small, militarized state, and forget Russia, China, and great power politics. That's the wrong way of looking at the world now. It's about Israel, Rwanda, and Ukraine. These are countries that are militarized, and they have high-tech sectors, and they're going to be innovating. And this is going to be, the new Spartas is actually the watchword for the next period to come.
Really fascinating, Melinda. It's great to have you back in the mix here. Don't be a stranger. We should be talking about this more, not less. Melinda Haring is non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and has been indispensable in helping us understand the contours of this war in Ukraine. As President Trump arrives at the palace, walking solo up the blue carpet, Kailey, he'll be standing side by side in just a moment here with President Erdogan. This is just day one of the NATO summit, with much more to follow tomorrow.
Indeed. Of course, he's already met with Erdogan once for a bilateral meeting today, but tomorrow, in addition to the meetings happening with all of the leaders together, he will have that bilateral meeting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who, as we were just discussing with Melinda, has reason to be more confident at this NATO summit than he may have had reason to be just months ago. Seeing now President Trump shaking hands with President Erdogan. Many of the other NATO leaders have already walked into this dinner. We just saw Friedrich Merz of Germany, Mark Carney of Canada, and Emmanuel Macron of France making their arrivals too.
A lot more to follow. Stay with us here on Balance of Power. We're live in Washington with an eye on Ankara and Ukraine for that matter. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We're off session lows. Still a lot of red on the screen with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining. We're looking at a sell-off in chip makers. That is dragging down the stock market on concerns over whether massive AI investments will justify lofty valuations. The NASDAQ Composite Index is down 0.7%, but the NASDAQ 100 Index now down 1.3%. The S&P is down 21 points, a drop drop there of 0.3%. The Dow retreating from yesterday's record. Right now, the Dow is down 161 points, down by 0.3%. I mentioned the sell-off in chip makers. We've got the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, now down by 4%. The VIX holding below 16 with a 10-year at 4.52% and a 2-year 4.14%. Gold is down 0.5%, 41.42 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude now higher by 3%, back above 70 a barrel, 70.64 right now on WTI. Barrel of Brent 74.33. Brent crude up by 3.2%. A Manhattan high-rise, the old Pfizer building on 42nd Street in Midtown, remains unstable at this hour. It is said to be still moving internally after columns buckled during the rush hour today. That is the latest update from city officials, who say engineers are working on ways to shore up damaged floors. They're also using drones internally to monitor the building. Officials are describing the situation as, quote, extremely serious and very serious in danger. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on this ongoing story. Again, the old Pfizer building, 42nd Street in Midtown Manhattan. JP Morgan Chase has relaxed some of the finance industry's strictest return to office requirements for its London staff after the UK capital sweltered through record high temperatures. JP Morgan Chase shares, they're just about unchanged on the day. Again, recapping here, stocks lower, S&P down by 0.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu in Washington, where we're tracking more dominoes falling that appear to be cascading toward the end of Graham Plattner's campaign for Senate in Maine. Of course, allegations surfaced yesterday, first published by Politico and then in an interview on CNN from a woman that Plattner dated years ago who suggested and alleged that Plattner sexually assaulted her, allegations that he denies, though he still is considering the path forward for his campaign in the face of them. As all this came out yesterday afternoon, we saw pretty immediately key voices in the Democratic Party polling their endorsement from Plattner. Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona, Congressman Ro Khanna of California, the DSCC, Kirsten Gillibrand, who runs it, and Chuck Schumer both suggested they would not support financially backing Plattner's campaign any longer. And now Senator Bernie Sanders, who was a big supporter of Plattner, has also polled his endorsement. It seems he said on Twitter earlier today, I've spoken with Graham Plattner about the best path forward for Maine in light of these very serious allegations. I have recommended that he step aside. Of course, Plattner has not done so yet, even though his video statement released yesterday evening did indicate it could be a potential outcome here.
Any accusation of non-consensual behavior is categorically false, regardless of the inaccuracy of the reporting, but mindful of the political reality it will inflict. We are taking the time to reflect on the best path forward for the state that I love, the people that I love, the movement I belong to, and the goal of defeating Susan Collins. Those were the goals when we launched this campaign, and they remain my goals today.
Those words, time to reflect on the best path forward, are still resonating. We have not heard from Plattner since then. To Kailey's point, he's lost a series of key endorsements, and now the Chuck Schumer-aligned Senate Majority PAC says it is, quote, redirecting resources away from the Maine Senate race in light of these allegations. This is now going to set off a series of actions that will presumably include his dropping out of the race. He has until Monday to do so, allowing the party to pick another contender to be on the ballot. This is where we start our conversation with our great political panel. Back together today on Bloomberg TV and radio, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital, alongside Democratic analyst Jeanne Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. How much time, Jeanne, does Plattner have to make a decision here? Obviously, the real deadline is Monday, but the party is going to want every minute it can get here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bernie Sanders' statement that you were just talking about, that is a sign that this is imminent. He has to drop out. It's not just an issue of the support he's lost, which is tremendous. It's the money. They're not going to put money into this campaign in Maine unless he's off the ballot. So I think it's a matter of time, and he should do the right thing and drop out immediately, given the Maine Democrats time to choose an alternative candidate. But can I just say about this victim, her allegations are incredibly credible. Some people questioning the timing on this thing. She's talking about breaking and entering and sexual assault. Democrats should require that he drop out of this race immediately and that they're able to replace him. And Democrats deserve better from their party. I mean, this is so frustrating. A must-win state, and you allow the Democratic progressives to come in and get somebody who we knew had so many awful charges against them, and you allow this to occur. I mean, I think the entire party has egg on its face, and there's going to be a lot to answer for, because this is what happens in the Senate, is this race. And so Democrats rather across the country are just livid, and right they should be.
Well, and we should note the victim who Jeanne is talking about said she was hesitant to come forward, in part because she agrees with Plattner's politics. She just doesn't support the man as a candidate, but she also, it seems, was worried about the notion of it damaging the Democrats' ability to flip this seat from Susan Collins. So, Rick, weigh in here. Is Maine now potentially a lost cause for Democrats, even if someone else steps up?
It's hard to say if this is the death knell of a campaign against Susan Collins. I mean, I would remind everybody that we've been having this debate around Graham Plattner for months. The idea that it took Jenny Rackicott to do this interview yesterday to actually finally get this guy to withdraw is a little bit embarrassing for the party that claims that they really support women's health. It's just stunning that this has been a debate for months and nothing's been done about his candidacy. The reality is Susan Collins was starting to pull away from Graham Plattner. She was ahead in most of the polls, even though it's margin of error. It's a significant difference than where this race was only a month ago. And I would say the big flashing red light is, what is the main party going to do about it? Assuming Graham Plattner gets out before Monday, they got to pick a candidate. Now, are they going to run a process? Are they going to have a mini primary? Are they going to do what Joe Biden probably should have done, which is leave it to party regulars to pick their nominee? Or are they going to put their finger on the scale and say, okay, we've chosen this individual to replace him? This is a really important transition that the party's got to go through, and they're only going to get one shot at it now. And so I really am very keen to see what happens in the post-Graham Plattner campaign with the main party deciding what to do next.
Well, one thing we learned throughout the day yesterday and on the late edition of Balance of Power is that nobody's looking at Janet Mills. It would likely be somebody who was in the gubernatorial primary, Jeanne, and unclear exactly how that shakes out in the next couple of days. Plattner is still technically the candidate. You can weigh in on that if you want, but I'm just curious, getting back to what Rick just said, what is the lesson learned here by the likes of Elizabeth Warren, Ruben Gallego, Martin Heinrich, Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, all of whom had opportunities with the Nazi tattoo, with the sexting stories, with the extramarital affairs, and all the other scandals that have been swirling around Graham Plattner here. They all had an opportunity to say no at some point. And I'm wondering what the lesson is now, realizing that Democrats see Republicans endorsing someone like Ken Paxton and are wondering why they don't have to apologize when Democrats in many cases do. Yet this is a party seeking the high moral ground on issues, to Rick's point, like women's rights. How do we rationalize what just happened?
Yeah, and Joe, I think, the issue is so complicated because it wasn't a matter of vetting. We keep hearing people say, well, he wasn't properly vetted. As Rick talked about, we knew about these allegations, and you just listed some of them, and there's more than we can account for here. And we knew this was coming down the pike. And yet you had respected members of the party, Elizabeth Warren and others, coming out in support of this man. Why? Because the voters of Maine went with him. And this gets me back to the Democratic Party itself. It cannot walk away from these states, particularly a key one like Maine, and say, we're going to allow the Democratic Socialists to come in, Morris Katz, Bernie Sanders, and the others, and choose a nominee, and then go in and say, we're going to get behind Janet Mills. And let's not forget what they did. They got behind Janet Mills, who has, not a lot of support. She is, obviously the governor has support there, but is not a lot of support for a Senate race. She's not a progressive in the way that voters want. And they kicked out, or they sort of pushed out people like, we had the founder of the beer company, the Maine beer company, thinking of coming in as a populist. They moved him out. And so that's where the responsibility lies. You've got to have a party that can go in and support potential candidates who don't come with all this baggage, who are progressives and populists, who will run against Wall Street like Kleber was going to do, and who can do it and be authentic in a way that the party can support. So I blame this on the party and not so much the members who, after people voted, came out and said, we're going to support this guy.
Well, so Rick, as we consider how Maine fits into the wider map here in the midterms, if you were running Senate Majority PAC or inside the DSCC right now, would you be thinking about allocating more resources to Maine if a new candidate gets on the ballot, or instead allocating more resources to other states, Texas, Iowa, Alaska, in the hopes that you may be able to flip one of them instead?
Well, you think about it. Texas is a state that went, plus 13 for Donald Trump, and Trump actually lost Maine. Susan Collins is the only Republican on the ballot in this cycle from a state that Donald Trump lost, a Republican from a state that Donald Trump lost. So, you've got to play the odds. I mean, Democrats would be out of their minds not to double down on Maine. But I think it would be great if they looked to other places like Texas, because $1 in Maine goes a long way. $1 in Texas doesn't get you across the street. And so you want to spend $100 million in Texas or $25 million in Maine. It's tough decisions for a PAC like that, but made a little bit easier even for Democrats, with the latest Supreme Court decision where they can coordinate. So now they can sit down with whoever is going to be the candidate and say, okay, here's the package we're going to do. We're going to run your TV. We're going to run your ground game. We're going to spend $50 million, and this is how your campaign's going to run. So it does make it easier in a situation like this to mount a campaign with outside resources in coordination with the campaign.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, our Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you so much for a discussion on those who could one day hold seats in the Senate. One man who still does, Senator Mitch McConnell, whose health condition has been a subject of many questions, apparently has spoken with the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, recently. This according to Punchbowl. We'll have more here on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. Chip stocks are slumping on worries that the stock market rally has run too far. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all in the red. We begin with the stocks. The Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor index, it is down now by 4.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 1.3%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 0.6%. The S&P 500 index down 18, drop there of 0.2%, while the Dow Industrials are slumping 0.2%. On a down day for much of the market, the Bloomberg Mag 7 index, though, higher by 0.3%. Again, the stocks down by 4.1%. The 10-year at 4.51%, with the 2-year currently yielding 4.14%. Gold is down almost 0.5%, 41.46 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude 70.61 a barrel, up now by 3%. Barrel of Brent 74.29. Brent crude up by 3.2%. NATO allies have agreed to at least $50 billion in defense industry deals to show President Trump that Europe is heeding his spending demands. Some of the contracts, though, show Europe moving to locally source some equipment it previously previously bought from the United States. Among defense contractors, they are trading lower. Lockheed Martin down 0.8%, Northrop Grumman down 0.5%, Boeing shares lower by 0.9%. We continue to monitor developments in Midtown Manhattan, where a high-rise on 42nd Street remains unstable. It is said to be still moving after columns buckled during this morning's rush hour. Those columns obviously inside the structure. That is the latest update from city officials, who say engineers are working on ways to shore up the damaged floors. They're also using drones to monitor the building. Officials now describe the situation as extremely serious. Recapping, stocks lower. S&P down 0.2%. The SOX lower by 4%. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet, Joe and Kailey. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, always good to cover the waterfront with Charlie Pellet, and he'll be back from World Headquarters in New York. Latest on the markets at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, as we kick off Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Thanks for being with us on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. As we keep our eye on oil prices, and Charlie's hit this a number of times here, crude oil moving higher today on news from the Middle East. We're seeing WTI back above $70 a barrel. It's about a 3% move, a little more than 3% for Brent, above $74 a barrel, with some tough headlines from Iran. 3 ships attacked in the Strait of Hormuz, heightening unease among ship owners and testing this whole agreement here between the U.S. and Iran to halt attacks. We're supposed to be in the throes of a 60-day ceasefire, but there's very little information coming out of negotiations, and the obviously impact of these headlines is not a good thing when it comes to energy prices. We want to compare notes with Bloomberg's Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall, and then spend some time with noted energy analyst Tom Kloza, who Kailey will be joining us imminently here, because these prices do move in both directions, and we're reminded they can go back up.
Yeah, I mean, the trajectory has been lower and significantly lower over the course of the last few months, when conversations around peace negotiations between the U.S. and Iran first started. But as you say, this initial memorandum of understanding was mainly supposed to accomplish one thing, that is the opening of Strait of Hormuz, so that would be free for transit. And clearly even that is still in question. And we're not sure what else in terms of progress is being made, as we're now multiple weeks into the 60-day period. The clock is ticking, and we don't have a whole lot to show for it, at least in terms of what has been publicly shared. So let's get right to Tyler Kendall for more on this. Tyler, I guess it's hard to gauge whether or not attacks like this are disruptive to the peace process, because we just don't have that much visibility into the peace process right now as it is.
That's a really good point, considering, of course, as you're mentioning, the basis for just this first 60 days was to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz can be reopened before they get into the perhaps more complicated matter of what those potential curbs on Iran's nuclear program will ultimately look like. But we're seeing Iran really flex its leverage over the strait. Earlier today, the country submitted a document to the UN's shipping agency saying that it has authority over parts of the strait. It didn't outline exactly which parts or whether one route may be preferable to another, but the picture is becoming increasingly clear, which is that Iran has been upset, I think it's fair to say, over ships starting to use the corridor in the strait that hugs the coast of Oman. We should think of it as being 3 essential routes through the waterway. The middle one is the one that we're steering clear of because there's still concerns that there can be mines. There's the one that goes through the coast of Oman, which is coordinated by the U.S. And then there's the one closer to Iran. And we're seeing these reports and now confirmation that at least 3 ships have been attacked in that corridor that is closer to Oman. That's giving us a clearer picture that Iran isn't too happy about traffic being diverted that way instead of closer to their shores.
Or traffic without their transponders on. Some of these ships that were targeted were not making their whereabouts known, which is troubling in its own way to think about the dangers of transiting the strait. Tyler, Iran is hanging over this NATO summit that is just now beginning today, and I'm wondering what you can tell us about the president's view of world leaders who he felt like, in the case of our NATO allies, abandoned us at the strait. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, has been going out of his way to point out the use of European bases and other cooperation that the president may not be talking about publicly.
Right. We had Mark Rutte just here in Washington the other week, but it didn't really seem to smooth the tensions going into this, because in President Trump's first public remarks after landing on the ground, he said he was, quote, very disappointed in NATO over this exact reason. Now, this is, of course, one thread. I do want to quickly point out another important part about working with allies when it comes to this conflict, which is that one of those ships that was targeted this morning was a Qatari LNG tanker. Yep. And of course, Qatar has been one of those allies that President Trump has boosted, has talked about how closely the U.S. has been working with as a main mediator in this process, but still one of their tankers was targeted, which is also raising questions on exactly where we stand in this peace process. President Trump at this point for months has said that we don't need our NATO allies to come to our aid, that we're going to be able to secure the strait without them. But it is very evident, even the president himself alluded to this idea that calling for their assistance was perhaps a test of our allies, and that they didn't go up to meet what he ultimately wanted to see. How this develops, whether or not boosting defense spending, getting those actual tangible deals over the finish line helps to ease the next 2 days, remains to be seen.
Well, we'll walk through this together, Tyler. Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall with us here in the nation's capital as we stick with the energy theme here, noting the increases in crude oil that we just talked about, and a gallon of gas today averaging $3.79 nationally, according to AAA. We turn to Tom Kloza, the chief energy advisor for Gulf Oil, back with us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Tom, it's great to see you. We've come down a lot from $120, and I'm wondering how you would describe this moment that we're in. Would you be betting for higher prices when you see headlines like these?
I'd be betting on higher prices for refined products, for gasoline and diesel, and particularly diesel in the second half of the year, which doesn't strike the nerves with the public the way that gasoline does, but can really have an impact on inflation and freight costs and so forth. I saw something this week I haven't seen before or since December of 1989. I saw the price of diesel in the bulk markets trading at twice the price of WTI crude. And I don't think a lot of people get that. They don't understand that WTI is, $70 or so, but the price of diesel is about $138 and the price of gasoline is about $125. These are relationships that are kind of like the Billy Bob Angelina Jolie marriage. They're not the kind of relationships that are going to last a long time.
Wow.
Well, so what's the driving force behind that, Tom? Is this moved from being an issue where we were concerned about the supply of crude to actually a refined products issue, and why?
Well, I think going into the year, we had looked at it and we said there aren't going to be enough new refining capacity built to handle world growth. You know, every time you add 1 million people, you add quite a bit of petroleum demand there. Now, if you throw in the fact that more than 1 million barrels a day of Persian Gulf refined product supply was damaged, Venezuela is operating on fumes at the moment, and Mexico is probably running their refineries at only 45% or so. The United States is in great shape. We're the cleanest dirty shirt for all the different markets in terms of supply. But the big story, and I think the big story that's not getting covered that much, are the drone strikes in Russia. You know, Russia has probably lost somewhere over 1 million barrels a day of capacity. They're running at maybe 3.3 million barrels a day, and the capacity is 5.5. And every week you see more large refineries in Russia set fire, and they're not going to be back anytime in 2026.
Fascinating. All right, Tom Kloza, let's stick with the Billy Bob theme for a moment. Is there an opportunity here to turn up the shale in the Permian? Can the landman get busy? And if you're an investor, based on everything I'm hearing, you're chasing the refiners right now?
Yeah, I don't think crude oil is the problem. You know, we've still got another 5 or 6 weeks of SPR sales. So I think crude oil, if anything, it is going to resemble a little bit of a mini glut. Although we shouldn't, be confused by that. When the SPR sales end, crude oil will be tight. And July and August, probably in the next 60 days, Joe, this is the highest demand you see worldwide. So we're going to need it. But I don't think, I think the president has been really successful in talking down the crude oil markets. If you look at the innards of the market and how much speculative money is bet on higher crude oil prices now versus the run-ups over $100 in the past, there's virtually nothing there. They are afraid to be long because they're afraid of a Truth Social post or a presidential tweet. He doesn't have the same impact in gasoline and in diesel. And, it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't start posting some things that they don't have, an idea to do because of policy, but they want to put the fear of God in the buyers who are speculatively buying gasoline and diesel.
Well, we have seen the president talk about retail gasoline prices and how he feels the prices at the pump should be lower given what we've seen in crude. He has suggested price gouging has been taking place. First, he was targeting big oil companies. Maybe someone informed him that that's not exactly who was setting the prices that consumers see. And then he ultimately, in later True Social posts, was targeting the retailers. His suggestion is that $2.50 a gallon should be more reasonable for the current environment. What would need to happen, Tom, for us to get back down to $2.50 a gallon?
Well, we'd have to see another $20 or $30 drop in crude oil, but we'd have to see refining profits, which are $50 to $60 a barrel right now, go back to that $10 or $20 a barrel number. And refiners are doing a great job. They're making a lot of money, and they're making it despite the fact that they're exporting a good bit of product as well. It's not worthy to attack the retailers. I looked at the average markup for gasoline this morning before I went on the show, and it's less than 30 cents a gallon. If you consider everything that goes into selling a gallon of gasoline at the pump, 30 cents is really not all that much. It's more than it was 15 years ago, but it's not by any means price gouging or a windfall.
So if you're an investor, should you be looking at the refiners with that bottleneck that you're describing, Tom, or do you go for the pipeline companies as the Middle East and Europe try to find ways around the strait?
Absolutely, the refiners are the best place to be parking investment money right now. In about 3 weeks, they're going to start releasing earnings. And I think that they actually have an embarrassment of riches to deal with. And they're going to have to talk about the current environment in the third quarter. It is spectacular. We have never seen these kind of refined products margins on a sustained basis, even in 2022 at the beginning of the Russian war. And back in the past, it's always been crude oil that overreacts. And right now, you could make the case that gasoline and diesel have overreacted, but I think you could also make the case that these are the products that really should have risen, and they are.
So if it's refiners that are the winners, but it's higher diesel prices that you see, Tom, who's going to be the loser in that? Where will the economy feel those effects of higher diesel prices?
The losers are anybody that uses oil, whether it be diesel or marine gas oil or whatever, to move things around the country. That's where you're going to see it. Now, we're in relatively good shape right now because we've dropped probably 80 or 90 cents on diesel. But if you look at the end of the year and you say, what's the one product that could have a paroxysm higher? It would be diesel. It would be heating oil. It would be marine gas oil. That part of the barrel, which is about 30 million barrels a day internationally, is going to be scarce without the contribution of Russian molecules. And right now, it looks like Russia is going to see lower and lower refinery runs because Ukrainian drones are going to strike them. If the president really wants to impact the oil market right now, he would, basically go 24/7 and try to get a peace deal for Ukraine and Russia. That's probably more important to the price of fuel than what happens in Iran.
All right, well, we'll try to write that on a note and pass it to the table of President Trump, where he dines right now with NATO leaders in Ankara, Turkey.
Tell him Tom
and
sent
going to
you.
be meeting with Ukraine's president tomorrow. Tom Kloza, Chief Energy Advisor for Gulf Oil. Thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. And we'll be back with more in the late edition at 5 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg TV and Radio.